Okay, so continuing on with our current assets, let's look at receivables. So we have, when we're thinking about receivables, you have to think about what's important for people to know. One of the most important distinctions is, are they accounts receivable from our customers, or are they other receivables, maybe from officers of the corporation or from the government as taxes receivable. Accounts receivable are also called trade receivables, usually due within 30 to 60 days. There's not a whole lot of disclosure necessary for that. These are basically what we do for our operations, and they're just a normal part of doing business. Your non-trade receivables require more disclosure because these can be loans from officers of the company, and a lot of analysts, when they're looking at that, want to just make sure that everything is above board with it. So there needs to be a lot of disclosures on that. Our receivables, both our accounts receivable and our short-term notes receivable, we also want to report them at what we're actually going to collect, or what we expect to collect. We could have a big promotion and have $1 million in accounts receivable, but realistically, are we going to collect all that? Maybe we'll only collect, $700,000. So we cannot overstate our assets by just saying, oh yes, this is our accounts receivable. We're also going to have to show it net of the allowance for doubtful accounts, which is based on how much we expect not to collect. So receivables are reported at their net realizable value, or otherwise cash realizable value, same thing. Okay, receivables. So the next thing we get to are our inventories, and this is specifically assets that the company has bought to resell to its customers. That's the definition of inventory: assets acquired for resale. Usually sold within a year of the operating cycle. And there's a lot of disclosure required with inventories. What method are we using? FIFO, LIFO, average cost. And then we also, if you're a manufacturing company, and I don't think there's any homework related to manufacturing companies, but if there were, there would also be you have to disclose how complete all of your inventories are, how much raw materials, how much work in process, how much is the finished goods inventory. One thing to keep in mind for the homework, you may have to review the FOB shipping, FOB destination to make sure you get the right things included in inventory, and also your goods held on consignment and goods that are out on consignment. So that just complicates the homework on inventories a little bit. Prepaid expenses. Our prepaid expenses we record an asset for prepaid rent, prepaid insurance. It's going to provide some future economic benefit, whether it is, whether it is short-term or long-term depends on when the benefit occurs. So if you prepaid rent for 3 years, 1 year would be classified as a current asset, and the other 2 as a non-current asset. Okay, and they're reported, if anybody asked, at their unconsumed cost. So in other words, whatever has not been consumed is still considered an asset. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. Okay, other current assets is the catch-all category for items that are not material enough to have their own line to be reported on. A lot of times non-trade receivables are reported here. So some of your prepaid accounts may end up here if they're not material. And just any other current assets that are not material enough to need their own line. Okay, so that pretty much takes us through our current assets, and our next adventure will be into the long-term section.